has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michelle Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 293, and I actually don't know what the title is. Hey kids, it's Michelle. Do you know those days when it seems like everything just folds into place? The universe smiles on you and you just don't know how it just all came together? Well, today was not one of those days. So I am recording this episode on my phone, and if it sounds a little different, that's why. One of my teachers says that when things go wrong, you should pause, breathe, and say to yourself, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. Not because you believe it. That's actually the part I love about it. Pause, breathe. What a pleasure. Sometimes it makes me giggle enough that I gather my wits about me. Sometimes I literally say it through gritted teeth or a fake smile, but when I do remember to do it, honestly, it helps. And part of what I want to talk about today is how the process of everything going pear-shaped is so valuable, and it's something we should take a certain amount of pleasure in, and we should try to take advantage of, maybe more than any of that. Because I think a lot of us assume that what we need in a hard situation is persistence, to just keep going, some kind of dogged discipline, more pushing, more just gritting our teeth and grinning and bearing it. And I do think that persistence is a beautiful trait, and I am all for persistence in the arsenal of things that get us through life. But I'm particularly drawn to the idea of resilience. And persistence and resilience are not quite the same thing. I think persistence says keep pushing, keep showing up. Not a bad thing. But resilience says this way's not working. We can still change the approach. We can, lower the bar. We can ask for help. We can use support. We can keep going. But we can go differently. And that distinction matters, I think, in general. And I really think it matters when you're trying to move in a vegan direction. But of course, how you go vegan is how you do everything. So I was thinking about, banging my head against the wall today. And I was thinking about how last year was very physically challenging for me. I had a couple of medical issues. I've talked about it on the podcast. And I had a couple of medical procedures. And when I started feeling better again, in late January, I also realized that I was quite a bit more deconditioned than I wanted to admit, believe, and certainly more deconditioned than I wanted to be. So some of that was actually quite quantifiable. I couldn't lift the same weights that I used to lift. I wasn't moving quite as rapidly in some ways. But the bigger problem, honestly, was my mental state, my mental thoughts about that deconditioning. I was annoyed. I was really quite annoyed that I had to go back to much lighter weights than I had used a couple of years earlier. I was annoyed that 8-pound weights felt, they felt kind of like an insult. And part of me wanted to skip right past that stage and get back to the heavier weights that I'd been at to prove something. Who am I proving these things to? I don't know if you can relate to any of that. So then in my little inner frenemy, that voice in my head started up with, this is ridiculous. This is a big waste of time. 8 pounds, sometimes 5 pounds. You used to lift way more than this. You're never going to get back to where you were. Now, of course, I knew that was fear, and that was not real. It was just my brain trying to protect me from possible disappointment. but I knew that jumping too fast, lifting heavier weights than really I was ready for, was a good way to get injured. And I knew that using the lighter weights for a few weeks would probably get me stronger, wouldn't get me weaker. And I knew that doing the right weight was probably a lot smarter than doing nothing. But knowing that did not mean I didn't feel kind of annoyed and disappointed and dispirited. Now, since how we do everything is how we do everything, that little scene with the hand weights made me think about what happens when people try to change anything, right? Maybe how they eat, maybe whether they're moving in a vegan direction, maybe they're trying to limit or eliminate the consumption of animal products. They don't usually fail because they care too little. They tend to fail because they start out with too much or too much judgment about where they are. And very often they'll decide that on Monday they're changing everything forever, every meal, every snack, every habit, every family pattern, every restaurant choice, and then they try to do it like someone who has 10 years of practice. Lots of support, loads of energy, and a fully cooperating, life. Most people do not have that set up from the beginning. They have the support they have the energy they have the family they have the schedule they have the habits they have. So instead of making those a problem, how about making those the structure? Reality can be annoying, but it can also be your friend. So the real question is, how do I work honestly with where I am? What reality is for me right now? And for me, that is where resilience begins, making friends with what is. And again, resilience is not the same as persistence. Persistence is wonderful, but it can really tire people out. Persistence often means just doing more of the same, harder, longer, and very often alone, and it is just tiring. And I think if we want to bring our thoughts around to the idea of resilience notices when your current strategy isn't working. Resilience looks around and it borrows structure from things that do work in your life. And resilience collects resources. And resilience is being humble enough to say, I think I might need a different plan here. So what would that look like in practice? Well, in a way, you metaphorically just lower the weight and don't make that a problem. I had to lower the weights I'm working with. If you are stuck and not making progress in a vegan direction or in anything, how can you lower the weight somehow? You don't have to start out where your fantasy self would start. You could start where your actual self is. And if you keep trying to change 100% of your eating overnight, okay, it does work for some people, But that might be the equivalent of grabbing a, 40-pound dumbbell and then acting shocked that you can't control it, never mind sustain it. And maybe a lighter weight is something like one breakfast you can repeat in your sleep, one dinner you know how to make that everybody enjoys, one restaurant order you can always count on, one dessert swap, one reliable freezer meal for those nights when your resolve disappears, around 6:15 p.m. And those are not weaknesses. That's not laziness. That's intelligent training. So the piece I really don't want to lose, a lot of people think resilience is like a private virtue, a certain character trait, and they imagine a strong person as someone who does everything alone, Lone Ranger, never needs help, just gets on with it. And of course, there are things that work that way. But I think resilience is very often community and social. It's logistical. And it can look like asking a friend what she orders at a restaurant. And it can look like bringing a dish to a family dinner instead of hoping for the best or not wanting to ask. It can look like making a short list on your phone of 5 meals that still work when you're tired. It can look like asking your spouse specifically for one small accommodation instead of silently resenting the whole situation or expecting him or her to read your mind. And it can look like listening to something encouraging before you shop or meal plan. The reason why there is this podcast that I make every week is because podcasts were part of that encouragement for me when I was going vegan. It can look like getting a coach. It can look like setting reminders because your memory is not some sort of moral virtue. And all of those are part of your resilience too, your arsenal of resilience. Not just, can I endure this? Can I tough it out? You can actually ask yourself, can I support myself through this? I think many of us have had much more practice criticizing ourselves than supporting ourselves. So, when there's a wobble, you know what a wobble is? When it all falls apart. When something goes off the rails, most people rush to turn that into a problem, some sort of proof that they can't do it, that they're too old, they're too unfocused or inconsistent, that it's too hard, that they're not disciplined enough. But a wobble is usually not proof of anything. It's just data. It's just information. And if Friday night keeps taking you out, or if the weekends just never seem to work, that means Friday or the weekend needs a little bit more of a plan. If family dinners are the hard part, that's where you need more support. If travel throws you off, I get it. But that just tells you the travel needs a simpler strategy. And if you cave when you're hungry or stressed or overtired or in a bad mood, that tells you that your plan is too dependent on willpower. That's very useful. None of those things is a problem. And the more useful question is not, what's wrong with me? What went wrong? It's, wait, what does this difficulty teach me about the support that I need? Super different conversation. And I especially want to say this to people in midlife and beyond. Having a hard time is not shameful. Having a realization that you need help, more support, that's not shameful. Realizing that your old way is not working right now or anymore, not shameful. In fact, I think one of the great skills of this stage of life is learning to respond to difficulty with, a little less drama and more design, less self-attack. Resilience is not a fixed trait that some lucky people got from the fairy at birth, or maybe you missed out on it. It's just a practice like everything else. You can practice asking for help. You can practice lowering the weight or lowering the bar. You can practice getting back on track faster. You can practice noticing what's working well and what doesn't. And you can practice not considering that every day that goes pear-shaped is some sort of indictment of your character. And over time, that really does gather momentum. You stop saying, oh, I blew it, and you start saying things like, sheesh, well, that was hard. What would help here? You stop saying, oh my gosh, I should be able to do this by now. I've tried so many times. And you start saying something like, what if I looked at this a little differently? What's the next step in the right direction? You stop saying, if I can't do this perfectly, why should I even bother? Ask me how I know. That one's a Michelle classic. And you start saying, how do I make this just workable enough to continue? I think that's resilience. So here's what I want to leave you with this week. Notice one place in your plant-based or vegan practice where you've been relying on kind of brute force or persistence. And ask yourself a couple questions. Where should I maybe lower the bar or lower the weight? Where do I need to look out for some extra support or encouragement or structure? And what information have I been calling failure? We call so much that's just data failure. Those questions, I think, will help you more than another dramatic promise to yourself, because the next step is not always more effort, right? Sometimes it's just a little more support, a little smaller step, a little more detailed plan for a niche part of your day or life or work that's just not sufficiently structured. And sometimes it's simply accepting that the wait for today is the wait for today. It doesn't matter what you used to be able to do. There's a lot of dignity in that. There's a lot of wisdom in that. And there is progress in that too, if you can make friends with it. Okay, kids, thanks for putting up with the sound of me on the phone today. That's what I have for you today from my phone on a day that definitely did not fold neatly into place. Pause. Breathe. What a pleasure. What a pleasure. And I didn't know how I was going to get this episode done, but I didn't do it the way I wanted to, but I did it the way I could. So thanks for listening, and until next time, just veg your best.
Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.